One. Coming to you live from the Cultural Hall, this is the Mormon News Report for the week of December 18th, 2017. We are your weekly dose of Mormonism.
Sprinkled with just a dusting of snark that will totally frustrate you when you have to scrape your windshield because the weatherman said only a dusting, and it's much more than that, and now you're late for work. So thanks, everybody.
Is this something that's from personal experience there, Brant?
Brian, it has been a rough week. Let's just end it on a high note. What do you say?
Rough week in Detroit.
Yeah.
Hey, guess what? Two things. Number one, this is our season end show.
Oh, say it ain't so, Brian.
It is. I mean, I'm sensing a little bit of relief in your voice there, Brant.
It might be me, or it might be my wife projecting her own relief on me because she is so sick of me being away every Sunday night down in this dark basement doing this show. So take it for what it's worth.
What is it, like 20-something weeks in a row that we've done this?
23, 24, I think.
24 weeks in a row. Yeah, that's like a half a year. So I am ready for the break. Second of all, Star Wars. Huh?
Yeah. So Porgs, who would have thought that they were the last Jedi that people were talking about?
Seriously. Yeah, and the idea that Rey was the granddaughter of Jar Jar Binks? Who saw that coming?
I mean, you want to talk about her divine lineage, guys. There you go. That's what it is.
Anyway, we're not going to throw out any spoilers, but, really, to be honest, Brant, I think I'd rather sit here and talk about Star Wars the entire show than talk about Mormon stuff.
Brian, especially with what we got going on this week, at least Star Wars will make you, somewhat happy versus the rest of this week, which is just like...
Blah. Yeah. But, we have a sacred duty to uphold, and that's to make fun of the Mormon news from the past week. And we are joined this week by a guest, Kwaku L. Say hi, Kwaku.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
So we had Kwaku on earlier in the year when we talked about the whole BYU kerfuffle, and we liked him so much we decided to invite him back on. Until that is, I learned that Kwaku has only seen one Star Wars movie. Kwaku, you're not even an American citizen.
Well, I have seen two. I've seen the one, gosh, a long time ago.
The one. He doesn't even know the name. That one.
His parents die in they're in a tent, they get killed, and he's in a little orange car.
That's the first one.
Is that the first one?
That's A New Hope, 1977.
And I saw the one that came out.
So about 20 years before you were born.
Yeah, probably.
And Brian, when you were about 12 or 13 years old.
Yeah. I mean, I was, I went into that movie with a beard.
I saw the one that came out a couple years ago with, at the end, she's on a mountain holding a map toward the old guy. And
So did you make the connection, though, that old guy was the same guy as the young kid that you saw in the first movie that you watched? That was the same person. Yeah.
No idea.
That's what makes the whole darn thing so cool, is that now he's old, right? So for us old crusty guys like me and Brant, that means something, right? It's like, wow, he's old and so are we. We grew with him. Anyway.
Oh, yeah. I'm not old, nor do I like Star Wars. So
just wait until your heroes get old. That's all I'm saying. Just wait until they get old.
Or look, you could just do what I do and just kill your heroes so you don't have any heroes, and that way your life is a lot better because no one is able to let you down at all. So there's always that.
Yeah. I mean, it's
a good outlook to have in life.
Yeah.
Don't ever get to know your heroes. That's all I can say. Don't ever get to know them. Just idolize them from a distance. That's my advice to the young Kwaku L on the show. Brant. So I thought that before we got into last week's question, maybe we'd talk a little bit about some of the changes that we've made over the past 6 months of the show. I don't want to belabor this too much, but we've kind of, I don't know, I feel like we've kind of started finding a footing maybe within the past few months here. We're doing video now, for example.
Yes. So, we've made it a lot of times that I get dressed up for the show. Got on video, you can see I'm still wearing a suit because Sunday's been crazy and I haven't been able to, get undressed from church and stuff like that, except for take a tie off. But I will say this, Brian, I think that one of the bigger changes that has gone on with what we've done is just trying to carve out a niche in Mormon podcasting. You and I both have this really soft spot for Mormon podcasting, and we love doing it, but man, it is tough trying to attract new listeners. And I think that we've tried to do that by going after and well, first of all, by grabbing the authors that everyone wants to hear from. Second of all, appealing to the millennial demographic, with people like Kweku. But hey, I guess maybe people really do want to see us on video. So here you go.
I guess here we are.
Who doesn't want to see your faces on video?
No. See, this is why we invited you, because you're the handsome component of this triad.
Listen, I mean, if we really want to get it, I could come up with a list of people who said, no, you don't need to, Brant, we don't need to see you on video. You've got a face for radio, so just stay there.
But let's admit, Brant, when we first started out, we were a bit, let's say, tight in our format. We were trying to get everything nailed in within a certain time frame. We tried to make sure everything was bullet pointed and scripted and get it down. And I think over the time, we've decided to just kind of loosen our ties a little bit. And we've had a lot better response from that. We started throwing out questions to our listeners and getting some engagement from them. And, you know, I think that I think the show has blossomed.
Yeah, sure. You could say that we're in the either pubescent or prepubescent phase of our show, I guess, if we want to make people uncomfortable or something like that. But Brian, I'll say this. You know me well enough that you know that if you don't have me on a tight leash, I can ramble and I can go and go and go. And I think that you and I had decided from the beginning, we don't want this to be a 3-hour show. We want it to be a quick and easy show that you can get to know the Mormon news of the week. And really, what we tried to do from the beginning is we tried to have the theme of taking Mormon news, looking past the headlines and trying to contextualize it. What does it all mean? Why, for example, would we see some headlines from some outlets, other headlines from another? You've heard about this group or organization or thing that's happening. What really is it? What can you tell us? And I think we've tried to stay true to that, which is basically, let's put some context around it and let's find a rational middle way. And I will say this, I'm very proud of our listeners, especially for a lot of the responses we get for questions of the week, that they seem to really embody that middle ground. Let's not, we joke about hot takes, okay? Let's not hot take everything to death. Let's think about this a little bit so we can try and understand the consequences of everything versus, oh, this is my gut emotional reaction to whatever headline there is.
I've been thrilled with the rationalism that our listeners have shown us in their responses, and even the critiques that they have of us. They're usually fairly rational critiques as well. But listen, today we're going to have we have Kweku who's joining us, and then later on in the show we're going to invite Ben Park, who besides Kweku is the second most handsome man in the Mormon studies world. And
a wonderful beard, I would add. So that's
he does. He's got a glorious beard. Yeah. And so he's going to join us to discuss some of the books that came out over the year and what he would recommend as some of his top picks. It's going to be a good show, especially since this is our last show of the year.
And before we get into the last show of the year stuff, the one thing I want to forewarn everybody, Brian and I are going to nerd out really, really hard with Ben about Mormon books, because that is the one thing, like, more than Star Wars, more than comic books, like, we love Mormon books. So get ready. If you're looking for some great Christmas gift ideas, either for yourself or for a loved one, you're going to want to stay tuned, because we're going to make sure that we get out some really good recommendations and go over what some of Ben's recommendations are for the best of 2017 books.
So should we get into the question that we tossed out last week?
Let's do it. So last week's question, should bishops interview kids behind closed doors? And we talked about this a little bit last week. We've got a lot more stories on it this week, but we actually got some pretty interesting responses. For example, we had an anonymous email who said, sit down with your wives and ask each other, honestly, are you okay that the man behind the desk, behind closed doors, will possibly ask about petting, porn, and penises? By the way, that's a fabulous alliteration, if I do say so, Brian.
He's the one I use often.
Don't we all? I mean, I know when my daughters get older, I can't wait to have that conversation with them. He says, no variable answer around that would never happen is valid. No variable answer around that would never happen is valid, because you won't know or have control. They'll be behind closed doors with him. I promise you, you'll feel the right answer to this whole question and discussion.
And Jim Montgomery said, a small window in the door and positioned only so the bishop is seen works for adults also. And Mallory Jean responded to Jim, not that we're going to get into a lot of different responses, but she said, I'm perhaps not only concerned about physical dangers, but conversations as well. And I think that's a really valid comeback, because it isn't just about what the bishop is doing in there. I think we're all, I think most of us feel like the bishop isn't just, most bishops anyway, it's pretty rare. I suppose it could happen, but it's pretty rare that a bishop is going to do anything physically awkward or uncomfortable. I think most people are concerned about the conversations that are going on. She wrote, as a professional counselor, I know bishops often overstep their role when they should refer people to professionals. They ask questions that they really just shouldn't. Stories of asking children if they masturbate or look at porn, only for the child to not know what that is, Google it, and then, well, that's all she wrote. They've been exposed to it.
Mel Johnson said, having parental oversight in place outweighs the bishop's concern for full disclosure, in my opinion.
And Hallie Johnson wrote, only when there's a male and female bishop present, which, the wording of that made us question where exactly is Hallie going with that? And I kind of like it. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I actually asked her. I was kind of like, that's a great idea, a male and female bishop, because we always talk about like the wife of the bishop is one of the most loneliest callings. Wouldn't that at least give some? Okay, I know what you're going through because I'm kind of doing this with you, and I like the idea of men and women serving together. And anyways, so this one's a long one. It's by Adam Ellsworth, but I think there's some good stuff in there. Maybe the host can answer this question because I don't know the answer. Is there any recorded instance in, let's say, the last 30 years of a bishop physically abusing a child in a bishop's interview? So, Brian, is there anything that comes to mind, and Kwaku will toss it out to you, anything that comes to mind of any big stories that have popped up in the last 30 years?
I haven't heard any stories of that. You're the one that did the Mormons behaving badly column, so if anybody's heard it, had the potential of hearing anything about it, it'd be you. Kwaku?
I've heard nothing like that.
Okay, so because I want to make sure I didn't have my own biases. I haven't heard anything either. Usually it's been either LDS bishops not disclosing things. I want to say there might be one, but I think it was a young men's leader. It's rare, especially if it's in a bishop's interview. Usually it is in other instances where something like that's happened and perhaps some grooming has taken place, but it's rare. So Adam continues, assuming there's no such instance on record, then the problem is not physical sexual abuse of youth by bishops, but rather making youth uncomfortable by talking about sex or exposing youth to too much information about sex before they feel emotionally or mentally prepared. The reason I raise this question is that it seems that the push for having a second person in these interviews stems from concerns about sexual abuse. The seriousness of sexual abuse is about as high as it can be. So if a change in policy would reduce such abuse, even of one child, then why not? Which is something that we've talked about for a while. We need to be looking at not the 999,999 instances where nothing happens, but the one where it does. But if there are no recorded instances of such abuse in interviews, then the risk is historically zero. If sexual abuse has not occurred in these interviews, then the problem being solved is instead discomfort and potentially talking too much explicitly about sex with the youth who are not previously exposed to it, which is something that we've heard from a few of our listeners, Brian. This is a genuine problem, but not nearly of the same severity as sexual abuse, and the remedy need not be as drastic. Having said all that, if there is a recorded instance of sexual abuse of a child in a bishop's interview, then why the hell haven't they implemented a policy of having a second person in an interview already? So I think there's some valid points there, and maybe it's not so much the physical abuse interview, but I think it's, and I don't even think that Sam Young and the people behind this petition, that's what they're advocating against. It's more some of the intrusive questions in a one-on-one situation, which could potentially turn into a dangerous situation, if I'm understanding it correctly.
So Nick Gallietti, who's responded a few times to our posts and our questions, he wrote, sure, some may ask for parents to be there, or just to qualify, sure, it's okay for bishops to interview children behind doors. Some may ask for parents to be there, but some environments, some family situations require a child not to be around their parents. Some children respond better to one-on-one. So I think that there are probably some guidelines that could be honed in addressing sexual and chastity-based questions, but some children do need some counsel that is most effective coming from a spiritual leader as opposed to a parent. I don't think he's wrong.
No, I don't. But I don't think the question is, well, I'm sure we'll get into it when we get to our hot takes. And Kwaku, we're going to want your hot take on this as well once we get through these. Brett Hicken says, it doesn't seem necessary to me and puts both the child and the leader in a situation where abuse and misunderstandings can take place. If we make a list of pros and cons, what are the pros of closed-door interviews with children? And Brett said, what are some of the cons as well? And I wonder if we were to make that list, especially depending on where one sits on the religious spectrum, how that list would shake out. Would there be more pros than cons, or who knows how that would look?
And Tracy McKay Lamb, who we've interviewed, she said, no, nowhere else would we let another adult be alone with our children and ask them personal questions. Even in our own primary, we double up. Doctors have nurses present. We teach children that it's not okay. It's not okay when with a bishop either. Not until they are adults and consent to those questions themselves. And I think she makes a valid point. We don't allow primary workers to be alone when they're working with children, right? We always make sure that they're paired up and doubled up either with their spouse or with somebody else of the same gender. So, I mean, is it a stretch to say that this could be in a all across the board policy for every level of the church?
Well, and to one of the thoughts that I had was, how does this apply in, for example, the medical profession? I'm glad she brought that up, because that's another situation where you have the potential of being in a one-on-one situation, talking about some private matters, some personal matters that might involve something that into some dangerous ground, especially if you're talking about anything sexual or something about your genitals or anything like that. And there's someone else present. Even in a situation where my daughter needs to go to the doctor, she's there, I'm there, my wife's there at times, and there's always someone else in the room. Finally, Denise Whitney chimed in. Wow, this name sounds really familiar, Brian.
Yeah, she. I happen to live with her, actually. She happens to be my wife, and I'm so thrilled that she responded to this.
So Denise said this: speaking as a current primary counselor and a former young women's president, I say no, bishops should not be alone with children in interviews. In my opinion, whenever a minor or a woman is involved, the bishop should request the presence of the person's auxiliary president, whether that be the primary, Relief Society, Young Men's, or Young Women's. This would provide additional support for the person, reduce liability, and still maintain confidentiality. That is a great comment. Brian, you should tell her that she should listen and see what we think about this, because I'd like to have more comments from her.
That kind of sounds like a rational take to me.
I like it. Okay, so Kwaku, we've had you on hold a little bit. What is your hot take on bishops and interviewing children and minors one-on-one behind a closed door?
You know, I think that I personally, if there's something I want to confess, about, it might be uncomfortable if I'm talking about it with my parents there. There are certain things growing up as a teenage boy you don't want to tell your parents, right? It becomes awkward. And so, as far as I know, our church has not had a problem with sexual abuse happening behind the closed doors in the bishop's interview or bishop's confession. I mean, it's not a recurring thing. It may happen once every 20-something year. I don't know. That's just some random number coming up. But it's not a thing that's happening all the time. So I think this is just a snowball rolling. I think someone put it out there. Now people are talking about it as if it's a really big controversial thing that's hurting the church and hurting members. But I would not want to, if I've watched something bad or I've done something I want to confess, I don't want my mom there uncomfortably. It's nice having someone with the priesthood stewardship over you so you can talk about that with them. That's, part of the confession process. I don't want to sound so BYU right now, but that's part of what.
Well, you are wearing the sweater, so it's kind of you're representing. But I think that the question isn't so much about the confession interviews as much as it is the worthiness interviews. That's where some of these issues are coming out of bishops maybe going a little too far in the worthiness in interviews of asking really personal questions, and sometimes to a really young person who hasn't been exposed to things like masturbation or pornography, and now they're being asked about it. And I know, so let me just give me an example. My daughter's 13 years old, so she had her first worthiness interview last year. And I kind of felt like I had to prep her as she was going in and say, okay, he may ask you about some things that you're just not that familiar with, or you're not that comfortable discussing, such as masturbation and pornography. If you are unfamiliar with those terms, or if you are uncomfortable with those terms, let's talk about it before you go in and talk to the bishop in case they come up. Was how I treated it, right? And then, of course, I was sitting right outside, and then she came outside. And, of course, once we got in the car, the first question I asked her is, did he ask you about those things? And she said, no, he didn't. So, anyway, I think that's where people are drawing the most concern. Go ahead.
I think I think I called it the snowball effect because I do think that I feel like it's all very, above the shoulders, assumptions being made. You just assumption what if a lot of bishops are asking really inappropriate questions, but that's just an assumption being made. If we had, if we were in Salt Lake City and there was a march of people, around Temple Square saying we're sick of bishops asking these questions that are, offensive and gross, then I think there's a point. But I don't think it's something that's, that the church should feel pressured to change or anything. I think that it might be a couple of people, some guy with a blog in Arizona who got some people on board to talk about the subject, and now it's becoming the topic of the week. But I haven't seen anything or heard of anyone, except for right now, you saying that you felt that your daughter might be asked those questions and she wasn't. So I think it's just coming from assumptions and assuming that bishops are not reasonable people who kind of, as a human being, you kind of sense when you don't want to ask a question. Just a little while ago, I went to my bishop's office, and I'm one of those people who thinks I've done something wrong when I haven't. So I went in and I was like, Bishop, I gotta. He was like, you really didn't have to go to confess for that. But
did you confess to him that you've only seen 2 Star Wars movies?
No, I don't want to get kicked out of school.
Good. I was going to say, like, let's be careful here, right? Like, that's something that will get you kicked out. So
I will lose my endorsement. But he said you don't have to go into details or tell me anything that's like, So even
right,
I had nothing to give him. He even said like you don't have to go into detail, and I think a lot of bishops are like that.
So Quaker, let me ask you this, because we established it kind of a little bit in the beginning. You're younger than Brian and I, so you're closer to, for example, the youth age where you're going to be in yearly interviews with Bishop and things like that. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm struggling from a cold. So the question I have for you is this: how would you feel? Maybe not so much having a parent in there, because I'm with you. All right, if I had to go confess to a bishop that a girl and I went a little too far, right? Or even hypothetically that I was a man, or I was a guy and I was having some homosexual feelings, and I did something with another boy, right? The last people that I would want in there would be my parents. Like, it's hard enough having to go talk to a ecclesiastical leader about it, but to have your parents there is like salt on the wound. However, the question is this: would you feel differently if, for example, your young men's president was in the room with you and the bishop while this confession was taking place, just sitting off to the side, not saying anything? What would be your feelings on something like that?
I will say, I joined the church 2 months after I graduated high school. So I never had a young leader or anything like that. So I don't know. I know. I didn't see Star Wars, never had young men. So I don't know. Never had to do seminary.
Why do we even have him on? No, I'm kidding.
All right. So that being said, let's extend that to maybe an elders quorum president. An elders quorum president is in the room with you and a bishop. And granted, this is a little bit different because you would have been over the age of 18, but still, I mean, just for conversation's sake, right?
Yeah. To me, it feels weird, like having an intimate discussion or discussing something that is about that's something that you don't want to let people know about. I would feel weird if I'm talking to my bishop and there's a man in a chair in the corner just listening. Yeah. It just makes it, and that to me, that's weirder. That's 2 men in a room.
Yeah.
I think
and here's the reality too, is that the folks that are serving in these callings, whether it be your elders quorum president or your young men's president, or even your bishop for that matter, they're in these callings for a limited amount of time. Now, we accept the fact that bishops have ecclesiastical leadership role over the church, and part of their role is to listen to confessions, conduct worthiness interviews, and things like that. But in a few years, these guys are going to be sitting right next to you in the pews again, and that's one of those things that I think about, like, how intimate do I really want to get with my elders quorum president or whatever when he's going to be, probably, I don't know how close he is to being released from his calling, but it could be 2 weeks from now that he's, sitting right behind me, Yep. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, I obviously it's a little different being a YSA ward in college, but I think that I'm just going to assume this. I might be totally wrong, but I'm going to assume that there is more sexual confessing in a YSA ward than there is among middle schoolers. Right?
I don't think that's a bad assumption to make at all.
I'm just going to assume. I've lived in Provo for a couple of years. I've been to those hot tubs, so I'm just going to assume, right? So,
excuse me, what? Is this one of those confession times right now because we have Brian and I here, so it's not going to be?
No. I'm just saying I've been to parties, or like during the summer, people are in the pool, and
where they got the Mountain Dew going, and they got the hot tubs going, and they've got James the Mormon blasting in the background, and things things happen.
You right now you sound like a guy trying to be a young guy in Provo.
Hello, fellow kids.
Mountain Dew with James the Mormon.
Right. He's like, no, dude, it's the new Eminem record. Forget about James the Mormon.
We like Khaled and So Delicious. That's what we're into. But you've seen people like they're kissing in the hot tub. and you're like, well, I'm going to leave and just the benefit of the doubt they didn't do anything wrong. But
chances are, yeah. Anyway, all right. Well,
Brian, let me give.
BYU students are respectful and are loyal, strong, and true. I want to put that out.
Every single one of them.
Of course, yeah.
So,
Brian, let me give my hot take really quickly, because there's a couple things that Kwaku mentioned that I kind of want to hit on, because I think they're important, just to reemphasize. I don't think that you or I, or really, how do I phrase this? Quite a few people in the practicing LDS community believe that a majority of bishops are doing things inappropriately. I actually think that, and I think it's to what Kwaku was saying, like, it's important to note that I think these individuals, a majority of them, are doing the best that they possibly can. And one of the things we were talking before we went on air was, Kwaku and I were talking about BYU bishops. And on the whole, the majority, I had great bishops. There were one or two that were just the dirt worst. But I think that's where I keep coming back to is, sure, the majority, they probably don't need it, but it's good practice. And I always keep thinking about the one or two that are out there that, yeah, they probably need to be reined in. And we'll get to it a little bit, and Brian, you mentioned it. For a long time when I was doing the Mormon News Report, I had a Mormons behaving badly segment in there, and people used to get really upset with me. Why are you trying to defame the good name of the church? And my response to them was always, it's not defaming the good name of the church. It's trying to show people bad things happen. Even in a place like the LDS church environment, bad things happen, and you need to be actively aware of that. So I'm with Kwaku. I would not want to be, to quote Hamilton, I would not want to be in the room where it happens, where a confession was taking place. But as a guy with two daughters, as someone who works in the youth organization currently in my ward, I would have no problem going and talking to a young women's president, or a primary president, or a Relief Society president. Maybe not a Relief Society, because that's something that my wife could take care of if she wanted to have a Relief Society president in there, just to say, would you mind sitting in on this interview? Just because I don't know how to describe it. Like, you've read too many bad things, and you don't think anything bad could happen, but I don't think anyone anticipates anything bad is going to happen. It's a lot of what I hear about with quite a few people who are practicing psychologists and psychiatrists who don't want, especially if they work with children, who don't want their children going to sleepovers, because they've heard a lot of horror stories about sleepovers. That's not to say that every sleepover is horrible, but stuff happens, and it affects you.
Right. Okay. So my quick hot take on this is twofold. Number one, I think that this could be a case-by-case basis as far as whether or not somebody else needs to be in the room. I think it depends on the severity of what they're going to be discussing. Now, for general now that's for confessional.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah.
So
I don't think you need someone else in the room if you're doing a tithing settlement or something like that.
Right. So there almost needs to be a one more step process where there's kind of an initial quick interview done by the bishop to find out what's the level of severity here for this before we really get into this, and then determine whether or not they should really have somebody else in the room with them or not, to protect themselves. If nothing else. I think that can be a case-by-case basis. Number two, and these are things, by the way, which we could do now without having to change any official policies. Number two, we have pretty strict guidelines on what can be asked during temple recommend interviews. We now have pretty clear guidelines on what should be asked during missionary worthiness interviews. I think it's not completely unrealistic to say that maybe we should have some pretty clear guidelines on what should be asked and what should not be discussed during general youth worthiness interviews. So not saying that, occasionally you're going to get the bishop who just goes off the track and starts asking, well, do you drink diet, Coke, and do you, or all these types of things that aren't related.
Do you listen to James the Mormon unironically?
Right. Things like that, which can affect the eternal welfare of your soul. But I think that by and large, most bishops, if they're given an outline that says, here's what you should be discussing in a youth worthiness interview, and here's what you shouldn't be discussing, I think most bishops will stick with that. It makes it easier for them. Anytime you can make it easier for them and make their jobs a little bit easier and more clear, most will fall in line and do that. So that's my take. Clearer outlines for general worthiness interviews, and case-by-case basis if you really need to pull somebody in the room to protect yourself as bishops and the children.
Yep, I'm with you. All right, Brian, should we get into the news?
Let's get into the news from this week, because it's been a heck of a Mormon week.
Oh, and we've got a lot of stuff to get into. Let's start with the positive first. This is from the Deseret News. Tad Walsh at the Deseret News. LDS Church donates another $5 million in 2017 for refugee resettlement in the United States. This is the second straight year that the LDS Church has donated $5 million worth of aid to the 9 voluntary refugee resettlement agencies in the U.S. So for this year, they donated $1.2 million in cash and $3.8 million in commodities or services. Brian, I think this is great, especially the fact that they're advertising this is what we're doing. Secondly, that is going to voluntary refugee resettlement agencies in the United States, because it blows my mind that people still are upset that, wait a minute, we're housing refugees here in the United States? What are we doing? They're not American. We can't have them here. And this is the LDS Church saying, no, anyone who has that opinion, especially if you're a member of the church, no, screw you. We're going to donate $5 million to them because it's important, because, we're Christians and that's kind of what you have to do. It's a great story that I like to hear. And I think a lot of what's come out about LDS church finances in the last 6 to 12 months, this is what they need to do. It really backs up what Mike Quinn was saying, that in his view, it was kind of a testimony strengthener to learn a little bit about LDS church finances and what they do.
So first of all, I love that you followed up "screw you" with "we're going to do this because it's the Christian thing to do."
Listen, maybe that's what Jesus does say. I don't know.
Yeah. But second of all, I also love the stipulation that the church put on this on these donations. I don't know if you guys heard about the stipulation they put out there, that for every dollar that was donated out of this $5 million, somebody's going to write a thank you letter personally to Donald Trump.
Oh, really? I didn't hear about that.
So he's going to be flooded with 5 million thank you letters thanking them for the donation towards refugee resettlements in the United States. What do you think?
How could you, if you're receiving all these letters that say thank you, how could you hate on them? Like, although I will say this, like, in the interest of Mormon passive aggressiveness, that's up there. Like, that's really, really good.
I think that, I'm in total support of refugees. A secret about me, I'm not sure how much it's going to hurt my credibility and if it's going to hurt 3 Mormons or not. I'm president of BYU Democrats. So, but
all 3 of them.
No, we're a big club. We're a really bigger than college Republicans club.
Bigger, but no, but bigger than the D&D club that gets together every week and role plays.
I did not know that existed. I don't hang out.
The Magic the Gathering clubs, right?
Oh, is that still a game? I thought that was like a trope TV.
All right. Anyway, no, that's great. How many members do you think that you have, roughly?
Oh, anywhere from 130 to 180.
Wow, 130 to 130 to 180 Mormons at BYU, mostly Mormons, I assume, that are attending regularly these Democratic student meetings.
Yeah, whenever we have like a big event, they all come. Sometimes we do like small events.
And then when somebody from faculty turns on the light, do they scatter like mice?
No, BYU is very, very good. Like, they are very reasonable and kind and letting us get together. I mean, it's a university, so they're trying to encourage thought and discourse. So
let me ask you, since you're our man on the street, if you will, what was the impression and what was the feeling on BYU's campus among the student population at large when it came to a lot of the different refugee type efforts that were going on? Did you find them to be indifferent, supportive, antagonistic? What were you seeing?
I found most of the people were pro-refugee. Most of the students are, they're active LDS people. They know what the church has said. They're following the church. I would say that most people are. There are a couple people. Actually, a guy I knew who doesn't go to BYU, but I think he wanted to, and he's very conservative. He's very Mormon, and he was on the board that we should not allow refugees in. And everything he posted, he was like, Islam is evil. Islam's from the devil. Muslims, you can't trust them. And I'm like, you know what our apostles have said about Islam and refugees, right? And he goes, they said we should love them. I never said we shouldn't love them. But
oh, really?
you have not tried to love them even in the slightest bit. And so it's like he's kind of conflicted because like his super Rush Limbaugh conservative Texas viewpoints are being challenged by a church he follows. He loves the church whenever it comes to like topics about abortion,
same-sex marriage, things like that.
Loves the church, but then it comes to like, oh yeah, we're Christians, we help the poor, we help refugees. Like, I don't like that.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I was interested in it, because obviously the LDS members of the LDS Church were really supportive, because the LDS Church came out in support of a lot of the refugee efforts and everything that was going on with I Was a Stranger. But secondly, I really do think it might have something to do with a younger demographic being much more comfortable with that versus other demographics. That being said, a lot of pictures and things that we've seen have shown that there is a decent sized portion of the millennial generation that sympathize with the alt-right and nationalistic movements like that. But that wasn't my impression at BYU. That's why I wanted to know. I didn't think it was going to be antagonistic. I figured it'd be probably more supportive. But Brian, can I tell you something that's not going to be supportive at BYU? This headline from Cristina Maza at Newsweek.
I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. Go ahead.
Buckle up, everybody. Masturbation will make you gay, warns leaked Mormon church documents. We're going to have some fun with this. All right, let me lay it out.
Yeah.
This is from the lead. The Mormon Church hates self-love. Masturbation should be strictly banned because it can turn young people into homosexuals and criminals. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believes, according to a leaked guidebook issued to its members. The pamphlet was created in 1981, and the Mormon Church has become somewhat more tolerant of homosexuality since it was issued. Nevertheless, some Mormons say the pamphlet reflects the beliefs of many Mormons about homosexuality. Brian, we know where the leak came from. You and I have talked a decent amount about this, because to me, this thing. All right, so I got to start covering my bases here. No, what they said wasn't right. No, I don't think that we should be excusing everything that was said in 1981 just because it's old. However, attitudes were much, much, much different in 1981, and I think that whoever wrote this pamphlet was probably taking a lot of leads from Spencer W. Kimball's Miracle Forgiveness, which, by the way, in Ed Kimball's book, Lengthen Your Stride, The Presidency of Spencer W. Kimball, he writes that Kimball expressed regret towards the end of his life for some of the things he wrote in Miracle Forgiveness. So you have to put all that together to see where they're coming from. But Brian, you were more irked with the Newsweek in general, right?
Yeah. So, and I told the Mormon Leaks guys that the next time that they leak something, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at how they posted it in their newsroom and compare that with how the media channels are spinning it, and just see if they could have perhaps framed it differently in their newsroom. So that's what I did in this case. So looking at their website, this is how they released it. The headline says Mormon Leaks releases a 1981 booklet addressing homosexuality. And then this is their description of it. Today, Mormon Leaks releases a booklet published in 1981 entitled Homosexuality. So basically a recap of their title. And then one more sentence. It was published as a guide to be used for local leaders when working with homosexual members. And that's it. The next thing is just a link to the document. There's no more exposition on it. There's no more framing on it. It's just put out there for the media to be able to pull from that and try to write a story based on that. So how could they have framed it, I think, to maybe make, let's face it, spin masters like Newsweek are going to say whatever the crap they want about stuff like this without any regards at all whether or not what they're saying is accurate, because all they care about is the darn clicks. So I'm going to go after Newsweek harder on this than I am anything else. However, that said, I think that it's clear that we don't use this booklet anymore. I think that should have been stated in there, because news outlets don't necessarily know that we don't use this booklet anymore. So I think it needed to be clarified that this is no longer in use. And yes, while McKnight did respond and say that there hasn't been any official, how did he state that in there? There hasn't been any official rescinding of this of this document. It was never a public document to begin with. So it's really hard for the church to come out and officially rescind a document that was never meant for public use to begin with.
I want to chip in here for a second.
Yeah, you go right ahead.
Someone who has been who is has a lot of discussion about him on the ex-Mormon Reddit, someone who Ryan McKnight has written an article about. I want to say right now that the Ryan McKnight crew, and I'm not saying this to be, I'll just say
more of a duo, by the way. But go ahead.
Yeah. The group of people who are always leaking things from the church, or always talking about, church's controversial issues with race or with sexuality. For the most part, and I'm going to confidently say this, for the most part, there are exceptions. They are not doing it out of their genuine love for Black people or for LGBTQ people. They're using LGBTQ people and Black people as pawns to get at the church. And I know this for a fact. All the time, I have these conversations with 30-year-old, 40-year-old white women or white men who are telling me, who are like lecturing me about how to be like, what it's like being Black in America, right? Like,
wait,
all the
hold
time.
on. I'm 43. Let me tell you what it's like being Black in America, Kwaku.
Well, actually, so anyways, okay, you go.
And if they were truly like, I am horrified at the way churches have played a role in hurting people of color or hurting LGBTQ people. If that was truly their objective and they actually cared that much, there are a lot of other churches they need to also be including in these discussions. I have not heard once Ryan McKnight mention Bob Jones University, a very prestigious, evangelical school which banned interracial dating until, 1995 or 2001, right? Things like that. They don't ever mention that. They never, ever mention Jerry Falwell or Billy Graham and things like that. And the way that they have gone forward, they never talk about the Catholic Church. They only focus on some elders in Salt Lake City. They only do that. They only focus on the apostles because at the end of the day, it's about getting after the church. It's not about LGBTQ people. It's not about Black people. I've been on that. Some people have sent me some of those Reddit posts where they're talking about me, and I look at the slurs used, right? And so it's just like, these are people who are, using some millennial terms, they're woke and progressive, but they're not. They just hate the church. They just hate the doctrine, and they're going to use people to prop up their anti-material, and they don't actually give two craps about the people at all.
So why don't you tell us what you really think about them, though?
I was going to say that is a hot tip. And I'll forewarn you, what's going to happen, right? You know that your inbox is going to be flooded and your Facebook messages are going to be flooded and things like that. You know what's going to happen.
Well, okay.
From people wearing fedoras. I understand this.
Right, exactly. Well, okay, so to be fair, they are Mormon leaks, not just religion leaks, right? Now they do have, I think they did recently expand to another organization called Faith Leaks, where they are going to seemingly go after other religions as well. So it is more of a general anti-religion thing. But because they're both ex-Mormons, I think their battle is certainly against Mormonism.
There's no one very firmly committed against John Wesley in the United Methodist Church. Who's going to be
right? Now sticking with this particular topic at hand, and again, what I'm critiquing is how they framed this and how it could have been framed in a way that maybe the media wouldn't have spun it in the direction that they did, which I have no confidence that the media isn't going to spin it in a way that's just meant to build clicks and, to hell with the Mormons. But in this case, I think that there was a responsibility to state that this booklet is no longer the source that Mormons use, that Mormon ecclesiastical leadership uses for addressing homosexuality. Perhaps even a mention of mormonsandgays.org would have been appropriate in their press release. And perhaps even mentioning that some of yeah, go ahead.
By the way, Newsweek, I think Newsweek brought that up. Newsweek brought up Mormons and gays, but I don't believe the Mormon brought that up. Right.
And then, perhaps also mentioning that there has been policy changes in regards to LGBT members being told that their sexual orientation is the sinful part rather than sexual activity. There has been a shift away from that. And certainly the church doesn't seem to endorse anymore the idea that masturbation leads to homosexuality. That seems to be a pretty antiquated idea. Furthermore, I think it should have been pointed out that these views in 1981 were pretty unfortunately pretty common. I mean, you heard it from churches, you heard it from politicians. I mean, homophobia was quite a bit more blatant and open in 1981 than it is now in 2017. I mean, it's still there, and it's still systemic, and it's still, as a strong undercurrent. But I mean, in 1981, you had Jerry Falwell and Reagan discussing very homophobic ideas directly to the American public. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I lived in San Francisco for a year, so I became very well acquainted with the LGBTQ community, and I mean, I'm a young Democrat, right? Like you can I've got no problem with. So I'm always on board with doing everything we can in Utah's culture to make sure that LGBT youth in Utah do not feel ostracized. We need to do a better job of making them feel, you can be a firm Latter-day Saint and believe in the doctrine, and you can be a firm ally to LGBTQ people. And that's just not with Mormons. That's with all religions. In the South, they need the work. They need a lot of the work as well. And these Mormon Leagues guys aren't going after those Southern churches, right? So it's homophobic.
Well, let me ask you, when something like this leaks, do you fear that it's also a bit of a trigger for people who have felt, shunned because of their Mormon identity and being gay? Do you feel that this could be a trigger for them reading this booklet and seeing the rhetoric that was spewed?
And that's the point. When you leak a booklet like this that was not for church use, that they did not send out, that they didn't print in the printing center and send to all the chapels, something that was not publicized. When something like that is leaked without context of MormonandGays.org, without context of here's how most people viewed it at the time, trying to frame it in the way where we have had this very pernicious, evil idea about how masturbation makes you gay, right? And they know that LGBT youth are going to read that, ones who are struggling with their testaments, and they know that. And they know it's going to hurt them. And if they read it, they're hoping that it just pushes them further from the church and they can join their online army or whatever. But they don't, the people doing this are not being responsible. They don't care how many people it's going to hurt. They don't care that they're being dishonest. It's all about building up their little empire. I am being very honest right now, man. I tell you, you get two waters in me.
feels good, right?
So, and I know we need to move on because we still got a lot of show left to do. But I will say this: in defense of transparency, I look at a lot of these things, and I look at it more from the, I don't want to call myself a historian or a researcher. I look at it from a commentator perspective. It's really interesting for me to put all of it into context and say, oh, look at this progression that went on. So I appreciate the fact that this is out there because it's another thing that you could put it into context and say, A, look how far we've come, but B, look at some of the stuff that was happening, and this wasn't unique to us, but it did happen within our church. So we can't be completely blameless. But additionally, it's a continual conflict that I have about these documents are available. Wow, that's really cool. Oh, wow, isn't this interesting? Versus some of the things that you were saying. I want to hit on a story really quickly before we get into one of our main segments of the show, but you may have heard a little bit about Joshua Holt. If not, it's probably because you aren't from Utah, because I know this is a decently sized story in Utah. This is from Jessica Finn at the Daily Mail. Josh was a Mormon in Utah, and he has mission in Venezuela. He has been in a Venezuelan prison since June of 2016. So when I was still doing the daily email report, we were hearing more and more information about him. It was weird because he had gone down there to marry Tammy Caleno, who he had met online, and they were both charged with stockpiling weapons like assault rifles and grenade launchers and things like that. So the Orrin Hatch specifically has been trying to do a lot of work trying to get him home. On Monday, Josh's mother, Lori Holt, circulated an audio clip of Josh saying he is very sick in prison. The audio clip is actually kind of difficult to listen to because he doesn't sound good at all. He says, guys, I don't feel very good. I'm very dizzy and can't think. My stomach hurts super bad. I don't know what to do. I've never felt like this before. So it's something to be aware of, that it is happening, and it's something to keep on your radar if you hear about it. because I don't know. You could hear about Josh passing away. You could hear about Orrin Hatch being able to extradite him to the United States. Okay, so let's move into one of the big stories that's going on this week. Ecclesiastical interviews. We talked a little bit about it. The Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, also known as SNAP, had some harsh words to say for the LDS Church. They said that male bishops interviewing young Mormons behind closed doors are a recipe for abuse. They should be stopped. They also thrive in a system, and this is all from Joel Castix, the Western Regional Leader for the SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. Castix also said predators thrive in a system like the LDS Church. This is not a safe environment for children. No other reputable institutional church, private or public school, sports group, youth serving organization, or community center allows one-on-one meetings between adults and children. Why is the LDS Church endorsing this horrible practice? Well, strong words. You're going to love this. This is from the Deseret News. In our opinion, Mormon bishop interviews are not invitations for abuse. This is by their editorial board. To which I say, of course not, because you're the Deseret News, and I would expect nothing else other than for you to defend, everything that the LDS Church does, no matter what, without context, without trying to look at it from all sides. They're responding to what was reported in the Salt Lake Tribune from this release, and there's something that they said that was really interesting. They basically said they should be cautious in what they're talking about and what they're doing, and the parents should be right outside the door so there's going to be no issues. I just want to read this. This kind of confidence allows for counseling, for soul shaping. It also guards against the untoward. As SNAP seems to support, the church should continually look for ways to both build and protect youth. Rather than calling for an end to this kind of dialogue, society should seek ways to support youth and parents in developing deeply rooted moorings. Candid conversations with the permission of parents and youth are critical components to crafting conscience and enduring character. Okay, we're not done yet. The LDS Church, in a surprising move, issued a 10-paragraph statement about their practice of clergy interviews, including with children. I say it's surprising because usually it's like 2 paragraphs, but this was 10. And I'm just going to read just a couple of sections from it. When a church leader meets with a child, youth, or woman, they are encouraged to ask a parent or another adult to be in an adjoining room, foyer, or hall to avoid circumstances that may be misunderstood. I would add, as an editorial note, that's a very interesting way of phrasing it, circumstances that may be misunderstood. Back to the statement. If during an interview a leader becomes aware of incidents of abuse, they are directed to call the church's 24-hour helpline to seek guidance from professional counselors and legal professionals. Our belief is that interviews should be meaningful and sacred opportunities for an individual to counsel with priesthood leaders who represent the Savior in their ministry. Guys, that's a lot of stuff that I went over, and we're not done yet. Any thoughts before we get into more of this stuff?
We might need to start switching to the confessional booths like the Catholics have, right? Where it's like kind of just out there in the public space and, it's behind a couple of curtains. And, if people are really getting worried about this kind of stuff, then maybe we should move the location to where these meetings take place.
So the woman who said that our church is, shame on the LDS Church for doing this. This is just, where is her credentials? Is this just one woman's opinion?
No, she is the Western Regional Leader of the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. So I'm not sure if she was one that was a part of that or if she's part of that.
I would ask, how big is SNAP? How big is this? Is it just one blog? Is it?
No, it sounds like it's a support network, and so it sounds like it's probably more organized and professional if they have a Western region.
Okay, I'm just making sure because sometimes if it's not like accredited, it's just some organization, and if it's just some organization, one lady in some organization, we shouldn't blow it up as if it, I wouldn't be like, oh no, whoever, I don't know if you guys know who is it Phil or Bill Donahue from the Catholic League? He'll once in a while, he'll respond to whenever someone in the media talks about Catholicism. He'll respond and they'll be like, oh gosh, the Catholic League is coming after us, not knowing that it's just one guy with a laptop. You know what I mean? So
nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition or the Catholic League. But let me say this though. They were featured. Their efforts were featured in the film Spotlight. So
I'm throwing up a screenshot here of the Snap website so you can see it. Does everybody see that?
I don't see it.
You don't see it. Okay, hold on. Boom. There we are. Okay. You see that now?
I see, yeah.
Okay. So, it seems like...
Oh, it seems pretty cool.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, just, this is just a cursory. This is true deep research, right? When you just skim through the front page of a website and say, "Yep, it's legit." But
I will say this though. I think Kwaku is you're not wrong to immediately want to start going through those questions. Obviously, it's a little uncomfortable for some people because it's like, wait a minute, you're questioning abuse survivors, and it's less you're questioning abuse survivors, and it's more, all right, is this a credible institution that we should be listening to versus someone behind a
Yeah, I'm not at all questioning abuse.
Right. No.
It happens. Right. We all will fully recognize, acknowledge that abuse does happen.
Yeah.
I actually say that taking that, right. Well, and I actually say that taking that perspective that you're taking is healthy. Okay. So this organization was brought up. Let's find out some more information about them to make sure that is something legitimate that we should be listening to. And I think they look legitimate. And I think that that's important to do is what am I trying to say? Don't take things at face value. Like, do a little bit of research. And I'm not saying that towards you, but I'm saying that's what we're trying to empower everybody to do is look into some of this stuff. So I will say this though, before we move on to a couple of the other ones, because I think they're important in the context of what we're talking about. I keep going back to the church's statement. I think this has gotten under the church's skin a little bit. I think that this is something that they don't like. I think that the fact that you've seen an editorial from the Deseret News, that they issued a statement that Eric Hawkins, the LDS Church spokesperson, who I swear doesn't sleep, has been questioned about this nonstop in every single outlet that's reporting it. I think it irks them a little bit. That's why they didn't just issue a 2-paragraph statement. It's 10 paragraphs. And we just,
Well, not to go on another rant, but I can't help but have my radar go off whenever nothing we really have is going to be okay to a lot of people, right? We know that the bishop interviews and the worthiness interviews are not recipes for pedophilia. We know that. I mean, like in the worst case scenario, but that has not been in our history. We don't have cases coming up where this has been happening, right? And even the other day, my friend at the University of Utah, she was she's a Latina, and she was getting a lot of crud from some people because of the Book of Mormon, right? She was explaining like, well,
watch your language there. Words like crud are, this is a family-friendly show.
I'm really heckin' sorry, but she was getting a lot of flack because she was saying, oh, I'm a Mormon and I believe in the Book of Mormon, and just believing in the Book of Mormon was controversial to them because of what Nephi says about skins and darknesses. And she said, well, I believe that the Book of Mormon shows a pattern of racism among its people, and then it condemns it in Jacob 3:9, and then furthermore, and so she was saying, like, to me, the Book of Mormon is very clearly just it may have racist quotes, but it's showing a pattern of racism and condemning it, right? And they didn't care about that. So to them, the Book of Mormon, they want to prop up as this piece of like evil white supremacist ideology, which it just is not, but that's what they want to do. So nothing we do, everything's going to be seen as evil and bad. People who sneak into temples and then leak the footage, they go, oh, look, it's a cult. But just because something is practiced differently doesn't make it a cult, It's just over and over again, everything we have, people are going to attack it and say, this is bad, 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 and not give any reasons why or any context. So I honestly think this is just another one of those things. And I think in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it'll blow over to most people. Some guy in the middle of New Jersey, he doesn't even know what the Deseret News is. And it's like, the Mormon Church has the one. I don't really care. I'm getting a piece of pizza. Go away. So again, it's not a thing that's shaking the world. It's just more people coming in. It's very Wasatch Front, Utah Valley drama that no one else gives a heck about.
Well, sure, but that's what our show is about: is Wasatch Front drama that nobody else gives a heck about. Number two, I think that the standard response in New Jersey is, I don't care, I'm getting a slice of pizza. Yeah. Or like everything. Right? Yeah. So you're not wrong there. Number three, the news is incredibly fickle, right? So you're right. This is, it's something shiny is going to come along in about 3 or 4 days. And all of a sudden we're not talking about this anymore. We're talking about some other things. That doesn't mean that it's not a discussion worth having now, but you're right. It's going to be something that that gets moved on from. But, Brant and I have had this conversation now for a few times that ecclesiastical or clerical abuse is a serious thing, and we do need to take it seriously. The question is, it's always a matter of proportion, right? And then zero, I don't want to say it's okay if it's a certain proportion. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying the stories about it. It's always a matter of them portraying it in this light, that there's this huge risk that we're exposing kids to all the time. And kids are being raped by our bishops, and it's just, or they're being mentally perverted by these interviews. And it's just, how much drama do you put into the story? And it's usually the drama that you put into it is how much you're trying to sell your point on the story. So anyway, we try to take a step back from that, look at both sides, and try to give a bit of a rational approach to all of this.
So let's get a little bit more into some of this stuff, because I think these are two great examples of some stuff that happens. So first of all is going to be from, oh man, this is like, I can't believe I wouldn't say I'm giddy about this, but this is like dusting off an old book. Let's go back to Mormons behaving badly, because it's important that we talk about this. Let's talk about 25-year-old Christopher Michael Jensen, who was sentenced in July of 2013 for sexually abusing two boys. They were aged 3 and 4 when the crimes occurred, and Jensen was 16. So Jensen is going to be serving no less than 35 years in prison. The WJLA in Washington, DC interviewed someone named Helen. Helen is part of a group who is trying to bring a class action lawsuit against the LDS Church for what they allege is covering up some of these crimes. Helen said that Jensen sexually abused her 4-year-old and 6-year-old sons during a 2-month period back in 2008. They actually served as witnesses during the trial for some other boys that Jensen had abused. She said that both Helen claims she told Jensen's mom and another person. She claims both were leaders at their local Mormon church in Martinsburg, West Virginia. A total of 6 families and 9 children filed a civil lawsuit. I'm sorry, it wasn't a class action. It was a civil lawsuit against the LDS Church in Utah. The attorneys argued that members in West Virginia actively covered up the abuse, which continued for over 5 years while Jensen continued to babysit. So how does the church figure into a lot of this stuff? The family's attorneys in the civil case believe local church leaders discussed the allegations of abuse by Jensen as early as 2007, and that no one reported the allegations to law enforcement. The lawyers also claim that church leaders in Utah knew Jensen was convicted of other sex-related crimes in Utah back in 2004. When asked how she knew, Helen responded, "From my understanding, some of the higher-ups in the church attended his trial." Okay? So there's Mormons behaving badly. Let's talk about Mormons behaving correctly. This is from East Idaho News. Shelley man allegedly caught having sex with a minor. Aaron, Arynn. Aaron. That's a Mormon name if I've ever heard one. He was 21 years old, made a court appearance on a lewd conduct charge after allegedly getting caught having sexual relations with a minor. Court documents show the 16-year-old victim told police the alleged sexual abuse by Millis started when she was 13 years old. Millis admitted to police he had been having sex with the victim 1 to 2 times a week for the last year until he was finally caught in late November. Documents show that the victim's 12-year-old sister was the one that caught them. The abuse was reported to a member of a Mormon bishopric. Okay, now it's getting interesting. The family indicated to the ecclesiastical leader they wanted the matter handled within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Oh, really? However, the leader told the victim's mother the matter could not be handled within the church, and he notified police of the alleged incident. That's the way it's supposed to go. So why do we do Mormons behaving badly? It's because we need to hear all these types of stories. And I won't say that it is widespread, because I actually think that situations like what we're talking about with East Idaho News, more of that happens than not. But the thing is, it still does happen. Okay, Brian, should we move on to the last big story?
Let's get into our big story for the week.
Man, we're going long, aren't we?
Well, it's the last show of the year, so if we're gonna have a big power show, this is it.
I mean, I'd rather go out with a bang than a fart noise. Okay, so the LDS Church this week made a very interesting announcement, an announcement on youth temple assistance. Okay, so here's some of the fact. On January 1st, Mormon boys who are ordained as priests, who are 16 or older, will be able to perform vicarious baptisms for the dead in LDS temples and act as a witness to the ritual, a rite formerly reserved for adult males. LDS girls aged 12 to 18 will be able to assist with the baptistry assignments currently done by adult female temple workers. Further, the annual priesthood preview presentation in LDS congregations will be modified to include not only 11-year-old boys who will be ordained to the face all-male priesthood at age 12, but also 11-year-old girls who will not. The new gathering will be called the Temple and Priesthood Preparation Meeting. So, guys, any initial thoughts on these new changes that are happening?
We have a lot to cover on this, so
quick, want me to blaze through it?
You if you have any initial thoughts.
I think it's great. I think I love it. Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the reactions that it's been getting out there too, right?
So let's do this really quickly. We'll make this really quick. Let's play a tale of two headlines. Where do you think this headline came from? Mormon girls will be able to attend new priesthood and temple meeting, but they won't be getting the priesthood.
I'm not going to say Newsweek on this one.
Salt Lake Tribune?
That is the Salt Lake Tribune. How about this one? Mormon teens have greater opportunities for temple service in 2018.
Deseret News.
Deseret News.
Bingo.
I love playing that game. All right, so let's do some quick reactions. Artist Partial actually had a really interesting quip in the Salt Lake Tribune. So they were talking a lot about women serving as witnesses. And this is what she said. Joseph Fielding Smith, who would become a church president, was the one who basically made the change for males only being able to do that. Until the 1950s, Mormon women routinely served as witnesses in the temple, according to LDS history researcher Artist Partial. Smith was surprised in 1959 when he heard that women witnessed temple marriages in Alberta.
We want to change that real quick. Smith was surprised. Oh, so we're talking about Fielding Smith, not... Okay, great. Never mind.
Yes. Yeah. Joseph Fielding Smith was surprised when he saw that. So Partial says he asked for the temple president's authority and learned that it was a longstanding practice based on item number 53 in the written instructions given to temple presidents. To that, Smith replied, "Where the idea of having women for witnesses for marriages began, I do not know, but my training convinces me that it is the proper thing to have the priesthood not only officiating, but witnessing the ceremonies of the temple. It has been that way ever since." Okay, so let's go to Jacob Baker, our friend and all-around resident weirdo. Okay, so here's what he said. "The bottom line worst aspect of these new policy changes is that they highlight precisely why gender roles in the church are so problematic by starkly revealing the limits of what women and girls can actually do within the structural framework of the priesthood and how unnecessary they organizationally are. In other churches, this wouldn't be that big of a deal. By comparison, the priest or minister and a handful of assistants are the only structural agents. Everyone else listens to the sermons or attends Sunday school, and that's it, men and women alike. But in LDS Mormonism, every male is a structural agent, or at least potentially so. Where females do anything, it is not because of structural or organizational necessity. It is through the literal charity of the church leadership. The priesthood already runs every relief society and young women group in every ward and stake, as well as every primary. It has simply delegated the day-to-day responsibilities for these to women, and it could rescind it at any time. Young women and relief society presidents are overruled all the time and could, in theory, be overruled in every case anywhere. The priesthood's organizational scriptural mandates are all-encompassing and without exception. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that committees at the top were racking their brains for how to get the youth more involved in the temple, and this was not just the best they could do, but probably the best anyone could do with the restrictions in place. It was obvious teenage priests could be allowed to baptize, since that's already a scriptural responsibility. But then how do you include girls? Well, obviously allowing them to do anything possible that women already do in temples, but with obvious age limitations. And that means custodial and domestic duties. There's literally nothing else. That's the entire set of possibilities. Remember when external pressure forced them to allow women to pray to open general conference? That was a huge deal. Imagine that being such a watershed moment. Things like this are always sold as progress and perceived as victory. As long as priesthood continues to be attached to one gender, this is not only the best anyone could hope for, it's the best anyone could do.
Wait, see.
Here we go.
I was honestly like, everything she's saying, I was like, I can see where she's coming from. Like, everything she said until that last sentence.
So I remember that was Jacob Baker in that last sentence. That was a guy saying that.
Sorry. Jacob Baker. Okay, for some reason I thought I was just talking to a girl named Jocelyn before this, and I heard Jocelyn Baker. Jacob, I think that everything he said, had some validity until the last moment when he said it's only going to change if women get the priesthood, which is, and I'm not saying that one day women won't have the priesthood. I don't know. Like, I have no idea, right? I'm not going to be that guy. But I think that, like, if you believe in at least I feel like if you believe in the church and you believe in the doctrine of the gospel, you like, it's, you know that, like, the parameters of men holding the priesthood is not something that's just like that the leader, that's because the leadership is like a bunch of misogynistic men in a room, like, how can we keep the women down? It's not that way. I think certain things are policy, and I think certain things are sort of doctrinally structural. And I think it might be a little disingenuous for him to claim that the only way progression can be made in the church is if women have the priesthood.
I will say this. So the interesting thing in that Salt Lake Tribune article was a comment by Emily Jensen, who actually brought up the fact that why can't we have some women serving as witnesses? And I think that that's an interesting one to start thinking about is, okay, so why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? What's the mandate behind some of these things? And I think that that's where Jacob's kind of pushing people a little bit too. And granted, I think he's more on the side of advocating female LDS priesthood empowerment. Well, but at the same time, I mean, he's not dancing around that too much. But at the same time, what I like about discussions like this, even if one might disagree with where one's going, it allows us to take a step back and say, okay, so what are we actually doing here? Okay, what does it mean? And that's where I think I'm totally with Emily, where yeah, I would have loved for women to have the opportunity to serve as witnesses. What priesthood authority is being used to witness? I mean, every time that I've witnessed, it's always been yeah, we got a foot up over there. So I don't think I'm using the priesthood that much. So that's what I like is it forces the discussion. So, and not only that, but as artists pointed out, there is historical precedents to show that women did serve as witnesses for quite some time. And we do have, even in early church documents, we have women serving as witnesses in baptisms. Brigham Young's wife, for instance, when they were baptizing somebody, she stood as a witness to him. And I'm not going to be able to pull the reference from that. But
by the way, I was going to say, I'm not hoping I'm not coming across as like some curmudgeon who's like, oh, I don't want change. Like, I've got no problem with, and if the prophet came out and said women can know the priesthood, I'd be like, hey, cool. And I don't think that we're even really on the discussion of whether or not women should know the priesthood as much as we are what can women do within the organizational structure that we currently have without changing anything, without changing policy, without changing priesthood ordination. What can we do? And some of these things such as, Nyland McBain wrote a great book about this, Women at Church. That was a very faith-friendly book, but it also showed the potential of what women could be doing more in the local level. And some of these things like women serving in Sunday school presidencies should not be a big deal. It should not require the priesthood to be a Sunday school president or in the Sunday school presidency. And in this case, girls being able to stand as a witness for a baptism, I think is something that is totally possible. Now, we know that Joseph Fielding Smith made the change in 1950s. We're probably not going to go back to pre-Joseph Fielding Smith times on this, so I don't see this one changing at all. But it is important to note that this is something that wasn't always a practice within Mormonism. It is now, and we just, it's our obligation as committed members of the church to accept that practice, and I'm not going to go, hold up picket signs, for women to witness at baptisms in the temple. But I do think that let me just put it this way. I told my 13-year-old daughter about this change. And I said, so there's been some changes that'll be taking place, the beginning of the year in the temple for what you can do. Because she goes for baptisms with young women's activities and whatnot. And I said, so she asked me, so what's changing? And I said, well, the boys are going to be able to do baptisms now and be able to witness baptisms. You still have to have the Melchizedek priesthood to be able to do the confirmations, but they're going to be able to do the baptisms. And she's like, okay, so what's different for girls? And I'm like, you're going to be able to hand out towels. Like, yeah, how did she like that? Squeegee the deck? No, it didn't go over well, And I hate to put it that way because I really want this to be really positive news. I really want it to make her excited to be engaged in the temple work, right? I want to be able to just tell her this is the awesome thing that you can be able to do the next time that you go to the temple. And instead, it's more like you can hang out in laundry services, and that kind of broke my heart. So Brian, this is the last show before the end of the year. Are we going to do a question of the week? Because boy, we're not. I think. Get it. Well, it might be interesting, but let's Kwaku, you had something to say there? Yeah, I do not have any daughters, so I can't really identify too much with that situation.
That's a shame, by the way, that you don't have any daughters.
Well, no, it's not a shame. He's not married yet. So,
I'm sorry. There's that whole BYU actual endorsement thing.
I'm very ashamed that throughout this whole interview so far, I've been having a somewhat argument with a girl I've been seeing via text. I am having
probably won't be having daughters with her.
I mean, we can help you out with that, live here on the show if you want it.
Yeah, if you want to bring that on, we can.
Brian and I have close to 100 years of experience, so
Problem is, she doesn't listen to James Mormon. I do. That's what no.
That's yeah. I mean, there's some things that just are irreconcilable, and that would be one of those things. Listen, here's the other concern that people have brought up. So let's get back to what Jacob Baker wrote, because he actually did get a little bit of pushback on his thread, and by some women who consider themselves to be pretty leaning on the feminist side, and they kind of said, well, Jacob, you're forgetting that women do more in the temple, that women do anoint and wash, and also place blessings on other women's heads in the temple for the initiatory work. So don't limit it to just women doing towels and laundry service and domestic chores, right? So there is already more in place. The problem is when you're getting down into the baptismal font, there's not a whole lot more to do. So it's kind of depends on where you're at in the temple as to how much more you can do. Just to throw this out there, I and my wife went and did sealings this week, and we had to have two brethren witnessing throughout the sealings, and so we were playing the sealing room shuffle, where one would act as a proxy and the other would be sitting in the chair to witness and all this stuff. And it's kind of funny. It's kind of a cute little dance. Everybody's kind of moving. Okay, I'll go over here. You go over here, and I'll go over here. Now, okay, now I'm going to move over here, and I'm going to, do we have two brethren sitting in the chairs? And I thought in my mind, I'm like, why can't my wife just do that? Of course, I think that about most things. I'm like, why can't my wife just do that? But anyway, I'm not one to question.
I guess I don't really have much of an opinion about that. I guess I'm one of those people who doesn't ever talk about what goes on inside the temple, outside of the temple. So I don't really have much.
And I'm definitely not trying to.
No, I'm not saying you are.
I'm not trying to cross any lines here. I hold the temple very reverently.
Oh, that's got awkward.
If we get some pushback from me saying what I did, I'm sorry up front. I'm terribly sorry if you felt that I crossed the line there.
I don't think you said anything.
But I'm not. Yeah. Anyway.
If you're not a Mormon, you're listening to this, you would have no idea what we've been talking about this past week.
So, question of the week, Brant. Since we're not going to be back next week, we're not going to be able to respond to them. Here's kind of what I would like to know from our listeners, and it has nothing to do with any of the stories that we've discussed this week. I'd kind of like to know your thoughts on our show. We've been bringing on guest interviews week after week with authors that we feel have very important things to say on Mormon history, theology, doctrine, even some fictional authors. And we want to know if you've been enjoying that, or if you would rather us just stick with the news and maybe do book review format or something like that. Or do you like us bringing the guests on? Do you like us having the authors on? So let us know. Give us Facebook comments. Find us on Twitter. You can actually comment on YouTube, on our YouTube channel now. Just look up the Mormon News Report on YouTube, where we post our videos and post it in the comments.
And for those of you who've been asking, we're working on Google Play. We're working on it.
Okay. Or shoot us an email at mail@mormonnewsreport.com. Give us some feedback. Do you want us to continue doing guest interviews? Would you rather us just highlight some books and interview them? What are your thoughts?
So, Brian, are we going to do the Patreon commercial?
Yes.
You want me to reread it live?
Yeah, since we're live right now, why not?
All right. Okay. So, everyone, you've heard us talk about Patreon for actually probably since the beginning of the show. So a long time, right? And I know, look, it's Christmas time. Everyone's got their hand out. You want to give some charitable donations here. Your kids are squawking about wanting this stupid Hatchimals thing that's like $30 and it's for, 5 minutes. And it's like, why am I paying for this thing? You don't want to do that, right? I know. Us asking for a Patreon donation is probably not the best time of year. But let me tell you this. With a Patreon donation, it's going to get you part of the finer things in life. It's going to show you some things that you didn't even know before. For example, did you know some of the juicy nuggets that were dropped in some of our interviews that we did last year? You might not have. Did you know that at some point in the near future, these live streams that you're seeing, you could probably get them every single time we record? You might not. Look, we know if you're listening to a show like this, you got a little bit of a sense of the finer things in life, the nicer things in life. You are a refined individual, a diamond in, dare I say, you are a pearl of great price, because this is a Mormon show. We Patreon subscriber to the Mormon News Report extended sessions. We spend a few extra minutes with our guests getting to the meat of the questions you really want to know. You've heard it all before. We turn the lights down low. We loosen our ties. We kick on the slow jams and really get down to business. Just visit patreon.com/Mormon News Report. That's patreon.com/Mormon News Report and become a subscriber today. You can do it for $1. That's it. That's less than the price of a Big Gulp I get at 7-Eleven.
You go to 7-Eleven? My gosh.
Oh, you don't even know. Listen, I've got a frequent 7-Eleven card. They know me by name. And when I go in there without my phone to get the scan, like I actually had one of them yell at me one time and say, "Where's your phone?" I forgot it in the car. Go out and get your phone. So I have an unhealthy attachment to 7-Eleven.
I'm a So Delicious guy, if you guys know what that is. That's me.
Well, we have families. We're broke. We can't afford So Delicious.
I will say
it's 7-Eleven for us.
El Doctoro was the closest I've ever gotten to heaven. So,
and we had a few new Patreon subscribers today that we want to give a shout out to as well. We had 3 new subscriptions?
We definitely had 2, and now you're putting me on the spot. I know Adam Ellsworth was one. I believe we had one more. I'm trying to remember who it was. I know Adam.
We'll make sure to thank them.
Adam actually had. Yes, that is a great way to do it while I'm trying to pull everything up. And thank you for bailing me out. We'd like to welcome on to the show Ben Park is an assistant professor of history at Sam Houston State University. A degree from Brigham Young University, a BA in English and History, University of Edinburgh, a master's in theology and history, and the University of Cambridge, a master's of philosophy in political thought and intellectual history, and a PhD in history. He has spent 2 years as a postdoctoral fellow at the Kinder Institute on Constitutional Democracy and is an assistant professor of American history at Sam Houston State. But more importantly, Ben is one of the guys that we geek out with all the time about Mormon study stuff, and Ben writes one of my favorite blog posts of the entire year. One of them is forthcoming books for the coming year, but my favorite one is his book year in review. Ben, welcome on to the show. It's been way too long, my friend.
Glad to be here, Brandon. I hope I can take that soundbite and use it in my merit review for the year with my administrators.
Listen, I mean, be careful. The Mormon News Report seal of approval, I mean, it carries some weight with it, so I hope you're up to the task, you know.
It's showing up near the top of my CV after this.
That's what I'm most proud of. So Ben, okay, we've got so much stuff to get into. 2017, a look back at a year in Mormon studies books. I don't want to be all hyperbolic, but this was a great, if I may say, one of my favorite years in Mormon studies books. What were your thoughts, just in general, on the year that was 2017 in Mormon studies books?
Well, it was a solid year. I mean, whenever, especially in a field like Mormon studies, is you're just going to have a broad range of both quality and content and different things. So for me going into year, I'm hoping that you can get 2 or 3 really solid books, and at least maybe one really exceptional books, and then a number of other really good books as well. And I think we definitely got that this year. We got a couple books that I think are going to be significant for years to come.
So let's talk about the one that I was so excited. You labeled this as the instant classic, and I said, Brian, back when we were recording, we were still doing this month in Mormon studies. We received I received an advanced review copy of Laurel Thatcher Ulrich's A House Full of Females. I did.
I didn't. I had to steal mine.
You know what, Brian? I know someone. Maybe we could hook you up or something like that. Anyways, Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, Full of Females, Plural Marriage, and Women's Early Mormonism, 35 to 1870. I read this book back in January, and I put it down, and I was like, holy crap, I can't believe that was so engaging and so groundbreaking, and just it was awesome. But the biggest thought that I had was, it's January. I mean, that's like someone putting out their Oscar-nominated film that they want to be nominated for an Oscar in like March and expecting it to run the distance to go to the next year. So Ben, the question I've got to ask you, A, what were your thoughts on this book? Because you labeled it as an instant classic. And B, what was it about this book that just seemed to grab everybody?
Well, it's an instant classic, first and foremost, because of the author who wrote it. I for a long time, we look at people like Richard Bushman as, the best historians of Mormonism. And Bushman, of course, holds that clout in the broader academy as well. But Laurel Ulrich, for going back 2 or 3 decades, has long been seen as one of the best American historians in the academy. She hasn't done a lot in Mormon history, even though she was raised Mormon. She dabbled in some things here or there. But so, I mean, everyone in my field worships the work of Laurel Thatcher Ulrich. One of the earlier books she wrote, A Midwife's Tale, is, in a lot of people's minds, including my own, probably one of the top 5 books in American history ever written. And so we knew, I mean, there was this long lead up to this plural marriage book, because we knew the quality of work she could do. We knew that she has a certain type of skills, digging into diaries, digging into the everyday aspects of lives. I mean, she's the woman who coined the phrase "well-behaved women seldom make history," which has kind of become a feminism motto, to where you have to be a non-well-behaved woman in order to make history, but which kind of subverts
a rabble rouser, if you would.
Right, which actually subverts the original meaning of that phrase, where it says that historians, we overlook the everyday lives of average women because we're looking for the rabble rousers. And her career has been about trying to find out about the non-rabble rousers of history. And she does that so expertly that it basically makes you sick because you're envious. But so, yeah, there's a lot of build up for the book. And of course it came through on so many levels. What makes the book so good is she's able to interweave so many different lives, so many different documents. And she just has such a way with words and framing and structure that just her methodology itself it's a tutorial on how to write history. And there are very few books that can match that level of skill. But even beyond her structure and approach, her subversive argument in the book, to where she recenters the first 50 years of Mormonism through the eyes of women. And it's kind of become cliche to critique the book based on its title, that saying the title of the book doesn't really reflect what the book does. And I heard her a few times say that she thanks people when they don't critique the title because she hears that so often. But I think there's something to that, because what this book does is it tells the story of Mormonism outside the sphere of the elite Mormon men. And it's a social history of Mormonism from the vantage point of the half of the population that often got overlooked. And so it's more than just polygamy. It's more than just women's rights. It's an overview of the Mormon experience.
And I'll say this, for anyone who's you've heard a lot about it. Really, what sold me was that first chapter within the book, where she was kind of laying out a lot of the things that were going to go on. I was reading it going, this is written so well. And you had talked about the lead up to the book. If I remember, didn't it take 10 years for her to write this book, because she was trying to go into source materials, contemporary source materials from women who were living at the time, not it's been 50 years, so let me talk about my recollections, because I already know the end of everything. This is what I'm feeling in the here and now.
Right. Yeah. I'm not sure the exact timetable and how long it wrote. A decade seems about right. And you are right that she focuses on contemporary sources. She states that out in the introduction by saying, I'm not going to be basing this on recollections, because recollections, as you say, are writing it with the end in mind. And it's these contemporary sources that kind of get the spirit, the tenor, the passion of everything going on that often get overlooked. If you look at the later writings of Helen Mar Kimball, Whitney Young, or Eliza R. Snow or others, it makes sense that that they're trying to make sense of what happened 50 years before, whereas these contemporary sources, they get so much better the spirit of what was actually happening.
So let's talk some more about women's history, because that's obviously a big part of it is her book. But there was a couple other books that came out too. Emmeline B. Wells, An Intimate History by Karen Cornwall Madsen from University of Utah Press. And At the Pulpit, 185 Years of Discourses by Latter-day Saint Women by Jennifer Reeder and Kate Holbrook from the Church Historians Press. So Ben, it seems like, at least when it comes to women's history, we kind of go in two ways. We either talk about some, I don't want to denigrate it, but some very basic women's history when it comes to LDS Church. So we look at some of the very powerful women, or we go into maybe the feminist side of women's history. These two books, they were great, and I especially liked At the Pulpit, because I think it's something that I know a lot of women who read it, it meant a lot to them. So it's not rehashing some of the same stories we've heard about women's history, but it was kind of giving them a little bit more to chew on it. And really, here are powerful women who are speaking authoritatively on doctrine, and it appealed to a lot of women from what I saw.
Right. If there's one lesson that can be all the more needed today, it's a recovering of this female past in the Mormon faith, to where we have some strong women's voices from throughout our history. And what Jenny Reeder and Kate Holbrook and the whole women's history team at the Church History Library did is they argued that there's a legacy here that we're missing. There's these texts that we overlook. I mean, the Joseph Smith Papers does so much great stuff, and we'll talk about them later, but sometimes when we focus in on the documents that privilege the voices of men, we're overlooking this rich tradition that is also crucial. And I think that's what this At the Pulpit volume does. And you don't even have to shell out the cash for the beautiful book, because they have it all up on the website, including more resources on the website that I use all the time, both in my research and my classes on American religious history.
Well, and to that point, and we'll talk about some of the stuff that the Church Historians Press and the Joseph Smith Papers Project are doing, but that's another thing that stands out to me. They're putting so much good stuff. The Church Historians Department is putting out such good stuff, and it's being made available online, whether it's At the Pulpit, whether it's the Joseph Smith Papers, whether it's Revelations in Context, and they're making it available for free, which is another great avenue for people who maybe want to know a little bit more but aren't sure where to go, and I don't know if I want to shell out the cash. Hey, at least it's available online, and it's something that you can get into if you're interested. And then if you want to support it, you can pay for it, because we all know that that's the way the books get made, is that people pay for it.
And another one along those lines is the first 50 years of Relief Society, the minutes that were produced. That's also available online. And it's, it's kind of a pricey book, so it's nice to be able to check that out online.
And just to give a quick plug for the Mormon Studies Review, the journal that I helped put together, we have a roundtable on the first 50 years of the Relief Society from last year's volume, and this year we have another wonderful review of these At the Pulpit sermons.
Did you by chance point out in the roundtable? Did you guys point out that my name is listed on page 713?
Or
did you miss that detail?
We told the reviewers to lead off with that. They chose not to, and we could only push them so far.
It was an oversight.
That's a shame. And if I remember, the Mormon Studies Review, that's volume 5, and that's available through the Maxwell Institute. Is that right?
Right. So 5 came out this year. 4 was last year, and 4 has the roundtable. And now that volume 5 is up, all the contents of volume 4 are free online.
Gotcha. Awesome. Okay, so we talked a little bit about women. Let's talk a little bit about race. Max Mueller's Race and the Making of the Mormon People from University of North Carolina Press. So we had Max on the show. A really interesting book. So we had talked a little bit you and I didn't talk, but in 2016, everyone was talking a lot about, it's either 2016 or 2015, Paul Reeves.
Religion of a Different Color.
That's what it was. I was spacing it. So this is another one that's kind of adding along, looking at Mormonism as a race and looking at how race plays a factor within Mormonism. What stood out to you about Max's book?
Oh man, it's just so theoretically rich and so sophisticated. It's meditative. It really makes you look at things in new ways. I mean, he's doing both explicit arguments of trying to recenter Mormonism's path through the lens of these marginal figures, African Americans, Native Americans. But he's also making a very theoretically complex and provocative argument about the archive, by which he means a corpus of stories through which Mormons tell themselves their origins and their trajectory. And he's arguing that archive has always been racialized, and that we tell stories that marginalize certain voices and center others. And so both this explicit argument and this implicit argument are interwoven in very sophisticated ways. I think if Mormon studies is grounded in a religious studies discipline, which is interdisciplinary, theoretically dense, I think Max Mueller's is a great testament for what can take place within that field.
Just a couple of quick thoughts here about what you said particularly about the archives being, the marginalization taking place in the archives. And a lot of that, I mean, when we talked to Max, a lot of that had to do with literacy rates, but also it had to do with really kind of who controlled the narrative, right? So you have, even if you have blacks who are writing, it still is being qualified by whites. and shaped by whites largely. The other thing that I really enjoyed about Max's book was that he took belief in the Book of Mormon seriously throughout it. I thought that was a real strength. Now, it wasn't necessarily that he was endorsing it as a historical text himself, but he was saying that this was a pivotal and important text for these people, and we need to understand how they viewed it, how it shaped their understanding.
I think Max has read the Book of Mormon deeper than probably a large number of believing Latter-day Saints, including
myself. I will, absolutely.
So Ben, not to belabor on this one too much, but tell me a little bit. I'm going to give you my theory. I really appreciate, and I wish we within the LDS Church, I really appreciate when a non-Mormon approaches Mormonism in an objective and unbiased way as an outsider, because I think that it does a much better job of articulating things that either believers overlook because it's just part of our religious experience, or non-believers maybe focus on a little bit too much because there's emotional baggage there. And so I think that what Max did as an objective outsider to Mormonism was look better at race than maybe we do even within the church, because he doesn't have that baggage of the LDS Church in whatever sense. Do you think his perception and his status as an outsider helped in his book?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think sometimes you need a new set of eyes on things that, and as a result, you can take questions that often become stayed in our circles because we go round and round and round doing the same talking points. And instead he's able to show a new vantage way in, or perhaps a new vantage point out. And so, I think coming from his own perspective, and especially coming from a broader disciplinary perspective, where he knows the different racialized religions in antebellum America, that he's better situated to understand the Mormon story.
So let's move on to one of the books that was probably, I would say this is one of the most anticipated Mormon books, especially within online Mormon circles, for a long time. D. Michael Quinn's The Mormon Hierarchy, Wealth, and Corporate Power by Signature Books. So I was a finance major when I was in college, and reading through his books, I was having flashbacks to my finance classes because of all the balance sheets, the cash flow sheets, the P&L sheets, and all that stuff. It was something that I was like, man, this is pretty dense. There was a lot of hype behind the book, and surprisingly enough, when it came out, it kind of fizzled a little bit. And my theory is this, and tell me what you think. My theory is there was a lot of people, specifically in the online Mormon world, who were looking for a smoking gun, like, okay, finances, the Mormon church, we got them this time. And then it was like, oh, well, okay, so the church is run like a business. That's not that exciting. What were your thoughts on Mike Quinn's book?
Well, I mean, to state the obvious from the start, it's hard to find more than a handful of people more significant to the Mormon history profession than D. Michael Quinn. I mean, his work has just been foundational. All of us who work in the field now are standing on his shoulders. I think maybe some of the fizzling that you're talking about here is maybe some people got the wrong expectations of what this volume would be, maybe based on the 2 volumes that preceded it in the Mormon Hierarchy series. I mean, this wasn't a new, groundbreaking, theoretically dense volume. It's much shorter than the other volumes. If you cut out the 21 appendices and the endnotes, there's only about 110 pages of actual analysis.
Yeah, 3 chapters, which we've learned that his editor actually had to talk him into doing those 3 chapters. He just wanted all appendices to be.
Yeah, so I mean, I think to best appreciate this book, you need to see it as a documentary source book, kind of a collection. I heard one of his close friends explain it to me as almost an appendix to his previous 2 volumes.
Incidentally, that's exactly how he saw it.
Yeah, so I think that's the best way to see it. So in some ways, you could see, comparing Quinn's volume to the other volumes we've been discussing today, you can see the distance that we've come in the Mormon studies field. But I think it would be a shame if we just kind of become disappointed in the book. I think the better way to approach is to see what the volume is trying to do and appreciate it for that. And I think especially religion and capitalism has become such a hot topic in the academy right now that I can see a lot of people really using the source materials that Quinn is providing in this volume and doing some wonderful work with it. And then once again, we'll be in debt to his work.
And I don't know Mike in the academic sense like a lot of you do, but I've got to imagine that would be one of the highest compliments that he would feel is the research that he's being used as foundational or stepping stones for others to continue to do more research. And that's the way that I viewed the book, was like, okay, this is it is what it is. Like, as someone who got a degree in business, I'm looking at it going, yep, this is business. I mean, it is what it is.
And he has such a wealth of sources. I mean, I learned a lot. There are lots of things in there that I had no idea about. And so, yeah, I hope he sees that as a compliment. I've heard that he was nothing but a great advisor when he was a professor at BYU. So I think he would take that type of a observation as a compliment.
So let's move on to some more source documentation. The Joseph Smith Papers. They released 2 volumes this year, both in the documents category. Volume 1 covering October 1835 to January 1838, and Volume 5 covering that, and Volume 6 covering 1838 of February to August of 1839. So Ben, we're getting to a really interesting time in Mormon history with the Joseph Smith Papers documents volumes and the different volumes that they're putting out. What is your biggest pitch as to why these 2 are really interesting volumes, considering the timeframes that we're looking at?
Sure. Well, I mean, those who know my research knows that Mormon history really begins in Nauvoo. And Volume 6 barely gets to that, but I'll skip over that. Volume 5 is great. It deals with the Kirtland Temple, the Kirtland banking crisis. I think you'll see some of probably the most sophisticated analysis on the Kirtland banking crisis in several decades. There was kind of a spurt of scholarship on the banking fiasco back in the 1970s, and then it's kind of laid fallow in the field, and I think the editors on the volume did a great job with that. But then Volume 6, I loved. I participated in a conference earlier this summer that allowed me to really dig into Volume 6, and that deals with the Mormon-Missouri War. And that's a period that raises a lot of questions. You have Danites, you have Mormon vigilante justice, and I felt the editors really dealt with that head on. And there are quite a few documents there that I thought were crucial. And in fact, I'm working on a project on Nauvoo right now, and I'm seeing a lot of developments in Mormon political thought a lot earlier than I expected out of these Missouri documents that I wasn't really aware of. And so I think for those who really want to understand the Mormon-Missouri conflict, this Volume 6 is something they'll definitely want to get.
And Brian, if I remember when we were originally talking when they released these volumes, you were really big on, I think it was Volume 6 was the one that you were like, this is a big deal, everybody.
Well, only because of the open discussion of the Danites, which has been, such a scandalous topic for many. And they had in fact, Ben spoke at the symposium that the Church History Department sponsored when they did the public release of these volumes, and that gained a lot of traction, and there are a lot of very interesting questions that people have. It's big, if for nothing else, that this is yet again another thing that we can now openly discuss. We can have articles in Deseret News about it and kind of dispel some of the myths.
So moving on to international Mormonism, we have Danish but Not Lutheran, The Impact of Mormonism on Danish Cultural Identity by Julie K. Allen, published by University of Utah Press, and Mormons in the Piazza, History of Latter-day Saints in Italy by James Turano, Eric Dursteller, and Michael Homer from BYU Religious Studies Centers Press. Ben, this is another trend that we're seeing. International Mormonism is being looked at more and more. I know the Mormon History Association, they're consistently looking for papers and presentations on international Mormonism. I will admit, I was a little disappointed because I thought we would see a couple more books, but from what I've heard, there is a decent amount of books that are being worked on looking at international Mormonism. And to give Kofort Books a nice shout out, I know that their book about Japanese Mormons was an award-winning book, wasn't it, Brian? Or close to it, or it was really good. I remember that.
Yeah, it won the best international book award.
That's what it was. Yeah. So, Ben, tell me a little bit about international Mormonism and the trends that we're seeing as far as publishing in international Mormonism.
Well, I think what these 2 books do and build off of the Japanese book from Kofort that you mentioned that came out a year earlier, what these do is, yeah, there's always been this interest in international Mormonism, but these books represent an important shift in that when we used to talk about international Mormonism, we were meaning white Utah missionaries going to foreign nations and their experiences. So it's kind of a missiology history, and it's still focused on what does it mean to the American church. Mm-hmm. Whereas these books, and including the Japanese book that was published by Koford, they look at the on-the-ground experience of these converts in these foreign nations. And what this meant. And this requires a different shift. It requires people who are actually experts in those countries under study to actually know what's going on. And hopefully this is going to shift our understanding of the global church, of rather than seeing it as one main tree sending out fruit to all these different countries. I think the better metaphor comes from Melissa Inoue, who said that it's like a banyan tree where we set down roots and they spring up everywhere else, and they're both codependent and independent at the same time. And I think this new generation of scholarship is going to help that.
So let's move on to Mormon theology. Terrell Givens, Feeding the Flock, The Foundations of Mormon Thought, Part 2, Church and Praxis. I will fully say this. Terrell was one of our first interviews. I think he was our second one, Brian. And when you told me, hey, we're going to interview Terrell Givens on the show, my jaw dropped. I think I just about dropped everything that we were doing, and I was like, how the heck are we going to interview Terrell Givens on the show? But Ben, Terrell's book is interesting because it's well, first of all, don't anyone think you could read a Givens book in like one sitting. You got to like sit there, read a paragraph, chew on it a lot. But the interesting thing that Brian and I were talking about when it came to Terrell's books is part 1 was focused a lot on theology. And he said that was what he was really interested in. And then part 2, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, when we were interviewing him, I think he talked about, well, a lot of people these days want to talk about the organization of the church and basically how we got here. And I guess I'm writing this because I have to, because that's what people want to know. But I'm more interested in the logical side. Is my memory right?
It felt like it was more set on orthopraxy. I don't know that he felt dragged into writing this. I think this was a natural progression for him. But Ben, what do you think?
I think it's important to note the purpose of these volumes. So this is, as you mentioned, the second volume in his Origins of Mormon Thought history. And it's important to note that it's Origins of Mormon Thought and not History of Mormon Thought. Mm-hmm. How he's expressed the purpose of these volumes to me is he wants someone, a professor at Oxford who's interested in Christian theology, who wants to understand, is there a Mormon theology, something that can hold together, that I can dissect, that they can pull these volumes off the shelves and get a sense of, oh, this is generally the Mormon corpus. And when you take that approach, there are definite benefits and there are drawbacks. And one of the benefits is you can get a very cohesive view about Mormonism, which I think these volumes do an excellent job. The downside is when you're trying to talk about the origins and the development of Mormonism into a coherent whole, is you're going to be doing a lot of the defining yourself and not just describing. You're going to be doing so that's why I think that these volumes are an act of theology as much as they are a history of theology. And so, yeah, I think this volume, it kind of is the leftovers topics that he couldn't address in the first volume. But I think together, seeing as a coherent whole, these two volumes are probably the most fundamental additions to the Mormon theological corpus in quite some time.
And it also continues this trend that we're seeing of Oxford University Press taking a really strong interest in Mormon studies topics. And I'm consistently impressed at a lot of the authors that are writing and the quality of the publications that they're doing. It's really, really good stuff.
Yeah, they definitely have staked a claim in the field with a number of really good titles.
So let's move on to the Council of 50. Matt Groh and Eric Smith's Council of 50 Minutes, What the Records Reveal About Mormon History from BYU Religious Studies Press. We had Matt and Eric on the show and talked a lot about the Council of 50. And I don't think we need to play dumb. Our listeners should know that the Council of 50 is something that's been talked about for a long time, but kind of in whispers like, oh, hey, the Council of 50, that was a thing. But Ben, this year was the year that the doors, I won't say they were blown wide open, but it's one thing where like people are legitimately talking about it a lot now. And this book was trying to put some perspective on, okay, what is the Council of 50? These that's me. What does this mean for all of us, and what do we do with it?
Right. I really like the approach that they wanted to do with this volume, where they reached out to over a dozen scholars and said, "Hey, we just want 3,000 words takes on what you think is a significant part of this volume." And they kind of, I was fortunate to be one of the authors, and they asked us, consider this approach, and as a result, you have a broad range of perspectives. And I think it's a good primer that's written both for just the interested Latter-day Saints, as well as maybe some scholars on the side. And I think publishing with the Religious Studies Centers, one of the benefits with them is they have such a great commercial publishing arm. They're able to get books out in much higher numbers than nearly any other press working with Mormonism.
So I'll say not just a primer, but a good disseminator of the information that was published through the Joseph Smith Papers Council of 50 volume, which is a hefty volume. I mean, it's like 800 pages, and it's going to be something that's, for your general interest reader, is going to be really hard to really get through. I really appreciate the Religious Studies Center's kind of role that they're adopting of being a good dissemination for a more general audience of some of this richer historical content.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Very few people are going to wade through the 700-page text that the Joseph Smith Papers put out in 2016. And so this is, more people are going to read these essays. And Religious Studies Center, they have a great reach out, not just to American saints, but internationally as well. And so, yeah, I think there's a dual focus, dual direction focus that they have.
And you're in there. So that's all the sales pitch that we need.
That's right. What more would you need?
Right. All right. So let's round it out. In the miscellaneous column, Patrick Mason's "What is Mormonism? A Student's Introduction" by Routledge, and Roseanne Benson's "Alexander Campbell and Joseph Smith, Two 19th Century Restorationists" by BYU Religious Studies Centers Press. We actually talked with Roseanne a couple of weeks ago, or last week, or the weeks are all running together, Brian. So what can you tell us about both Patrick and Roseanne's book?
Well, Patrick's book is added to Routledge just put out last year another introductory survey by John Charles Duffy and David Howlett, that Mormonism, the Basics, I think is the title, probably directed more to religious studies perspective, and Patrick Mason's more of a history-based perspective. The publication of those books kind of reflect this move in academia that's seeing more classes on Mormonism. And if you're going to have classes on Mormonism, you need these types of textbook primers. And there's few people better prepared to write it than Patrick Mason, who has served as a Mormon studies chair and as the interlocutor between the Mormon studies realm and the non-Mormon world. And then Roseanne Benson's book, which I'm making my way through right now, is another good Religious Studies Center production that blends both a understanding of Mormonism's past, as well as reaching out to see what's the broader culture in which Joseph Smith was raised. And you can see that through another restorationist figure like Alexander Campbell. Well, Ben, and this is the crazy thing. We only talked about the books. We didn't even talk about a lot of the studies, or the articles and the journal entries that came out this last year. That was 2017 just in books. So I'm hoping, from what I've heard, 2018 should be another really good year. We want to thank you for coming on. Thank you for staying up late with us. You can follow Ben at his personal blog, professorpark.wordpress.com. He writes about Mormonism. He writes about a little bit of U.S. history and all that stuff. And Ben, we want to thank you for coming on, and hopefully we can have you come on, I don't want to say next December, but sometime before then to geek out with a little Mormon studies stuff with us.
Well, especially when you get that Nauvoo book out.
Ah, yes.
My pleasure, guys. First time in a long time.
That's right. That's what I like to hear.
Okay, hold on a second here. So if you follow publishing in Mormon studies at all, which you know that we do, you've undoubtedly heard of Greg Koford Books, an independent publisher that specializes in Mormon history, theology, philosophy, scripture, and other genres. In fact, the books that Greg Koford Books has published over the past 17 years now have won more awards than any other independent book publisher in Mormon studies. So Greg Koford Books has just announced this. They're pleased to offer a 15% discount to Mormon News Report listeners from their website at gregkoford.com. All you have to do is enter the word news report. That's one word in all capital letters, news report, into the discount code box at checkout to receive your 15% off. Orders at over $50 qualify for free shipping, and local area customers in the Wasatch Front area are welcome to stop by the Greg Koford Books office in Sandy to pick up their orders. So visit gregkoford.com, that's GREGKOFFORD.com, and enter news report, all caps, one word, at checkout to get your 15% discount as one of our valued listeners.
And now for your moment in history, courtesy of our friends at todayinmormonhistory.com. 115 years ago this week, on December 13th, 1902, Rutger Clausen recorded the following at the St. George Stake. Priesthood meeting. President Snow presided. I dwelt upon the principle of union, the evil of self-abuse among the young, and punctuality, and the importance of keeping our promises. Brian, that just goes to show you, self-abuse has been around for a long time.
Man, I'm surprised that they didn't quote that in the booklet that was leaked.
See, and you know what? If Newsweek was around then, you know they would have run with that and done something crazy with it. And that is our show. We'd like to thank Kwaku L. and Ben Park for joining us. This show is brought to you, as always, by The Cultural Hall Podcast. Be sure to check out the rest of the shows available at theculturalhall.com. Music for today's show was provided by Scott Holmes, and Brian Whitney produced and edited today's show.
And, again, we appreciate those who have contributed to our patreon.com. Were you able to find the second person who subscribed to us this week?
Yes, I believe his name was Mike Lechefitan, I think.
Now that you said it, now that you butchered his name that badly.
Lecheminant. Listen, my accents aren't that good. Michael Lecheminant.
So we appreciate both of you. Adam Ellsworth contributed at $5 a month pledge, and was it Mike?
Michael Lecheminant contributed $2 a month.
At $2 a month. So we greatly appreciate both of you. What are we up to now, and what's our goal?
I think we are up to about $27 a month, and the goal is $50. If we get to $50 a month, we could live stream this on Facebook. And is it 50 or 55?
It's 55.
That's what it was. Live stream it on Facebook, so that way you can see us live and in living color whenever you want on YouTube.
And you can comment. We can read your comments live on the show.
Yep.
So
and reviews. We're always looking for reviews, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate that. I think we're still up at about 12 right now, and we're trying to get to 20 because it gives us increased visibility. So if you are thinking about giving us a review, whether you love us or hate us, please take a moment to spill your guts on iTunes. We appreciate it.
And we love it. As always, if you'd like to reach out to us directly, you can email us at mail@mormonnewsreport.com. Folks, we will be back in the new year with more news, commentary, and interviews with a little bit of snark. Until then, from the bottom of our hearts, have a very Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays, a Happy New Year, and we'll talk to you again after a while.